IVM.
The new economy of the world today has been driven ahead by leaders who don't just focus on a few singular aspects of the companies they lead, but rather have a broader outlook on all the core pieces that can be deemed essential. And with this outlook, help drive consistent evolution for these pieces and enable not just growth for the businesses itself, but to everyone who works in them. One such leader whose insights have always had an amplified effect on my understanding of things has been Deepali Nair, the CMO of IBM India and South Asia, who through her vast experience across leadership roles and across sectors has a unique vantage point on where the world we work in is headed and what leaders of tomorrow need to work towards. I'm Varun Duggirala, the co-founder and content chief for The Glitch, and we're right back with Advertising is Dead.
Namaskar, dear Bandhu. My name is Ashish Vidyarthi. These are truly challenging times, and in these times, we need hope. Do take time to listen to my podcast, Begin the Journey. Available on IVM Podcasts, website, app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember, there is hope because there's one life and we are alive.
Welcome back to Advertising is Dead with Deepali. Deepali, I'm happy we could finally do this.
Yeah, I know we've done postponements, but finally we are here.
I am the culprit for this postponement last time, but I'm happy we were able to do this, and I think that a couple of weeks ago you and I were on a panel together, and what I've actually found very interesting, or rather to something that kind of tapped into my head, was the fact that your perspective on things was something that was something which I know for a fact that my audience would generally enjoy. And I thought it'd be great to kind of have an extended chat rather than having a few more people like we always have on panel discussions, but actually have this conversation straight with you to kind of dig into that a little bit more.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Varun.
And just to start off, I want to ask you, you've been in the marketing space for a period of time. How have you seen the practice of marketing kind of evolve? I want to kind of start off with that.
It has evolved, Varun, because I often say this, that what I studied in college sounds like history of marketing now. Because a lot of the stuff that we studied and how things were done, the basic principles may remain the same, but how it's executed in the market is completely different from a perspective of, let's say, just brand management as an example. So that's one difference. And the second is that in the last 16, 17 years, the advent of digital has completely changed the dynamics of how marketing function is organized inside an organization. And the change is seen far more in the service industry, where concepts such as customer lifetime value, acquisition, performance marketing, which did not exist in the vocabulary of the marketeers earlier. So I'm not just talking about digital as a channel of communication that has changed and that's new, that has come in, because that change has happened over the ages. We had radio and TV and then new things happened. So I'm not talking about channel of communication. I'm talking about the fact that marketers today are responsible for bringing in leads, for renewals, for cross-selling, for upselling. And those hardcore numbers that have come into the marketing did not exist earlier. And that's a fun place to be, because finally marketing can prove that we are adding tremendous amount of value, and that, it's not just the brand health score that we are achieving. This, of course, still does not exist in FMCG marketing. There, I think the traditional marketing concepts are still predominant, because those marketers and brand managers are still not doing performance marketing, still not doing leads, because the structure of the business is different. But service industry, e-commerce, be it financial services, ed tech, fintech, all of these places, the new performance marketing discipline is absolutely changing the way marketers have to do their jobs.
The word performance marketing is something that I've heard so much more in recent times, right? I think that even though I've been, I've always been in a digital side of things, but I've always realized that performance has been a term that was initially there, but it was looked at as one of those add-on things you would have to do to get leads and push for sale. But now I even hear like you mentioned, FMCG is obviously taking its time with that, but that has become a core area of focus, and also then kind of brings in a lot more focus on things like data and all other metrics.
Yes, absolutely. It's not just about the matrix, though. To me, it's also about the fact that a marketer has to learn technology. How technological concepts are making their lives different. So just as a very small example, artificial intelligence can actually do predictions for marketers, which can be utilized to make a customer journey very, very different online. And can be integrated with the offline customer journey. So you're actually able to see a customer before acquisition, and and then serve, let's say, banners or serve campaign, digital assets to make it faster, to make it better, to ensure that you get a better wallet share from the customer.
When you started off, did you imagine that these were the things that you would end up having to talk about when it came to marketing? You had to go back to when you started.
Never ever. I had not imagined the world to be like this at all. In fact, let me share two anecdotes with you. One is that I'm a double major, English and mathematics, in my graduation. And when I was doing my marketing, it was considered to be this very creative and, that kind of a role that if you're a brand manager, you have to be very creative. If you're great at English, I'm talking about concepts 30 years ago. Huh? So, therefore, Dipali, you will do really great at marketing and therefore you should be in marketing, right? And I was like, what's happening to my maths degree, right? And then when this whole performance marketing thing happened, and now I'm a very numbers person and I'm very analytics and I'm able to draw inferences from Excel sheets very quickly, right? So I had never imagined the world to be like this, because I'd been told that marketing is all about, creativity and communication. That's one thing. And Varun, the how should I say, the bulb really lit, when I took my sabbatical when my son was born in the year 2005. And I was doing a lot of projects for American companies. One of those companies was a marketing process consultant, and they had, Microsoft as a client. And because of that, I had to read up on what was happening in the American marketing fraternity and American, marketers. And that's when I realized that the world of future is going to be different. So after that, when I took over jobs and when I had opportunities to look at assignments, where I was working, I always opted for technology and digital assignments, knowing that the world of the future is going to be like this. So when I started out in 1993, I did not know the world was going to be like this. But, when I restarted my career in 2006, I had an inkling that this world was going to change. And I think that's where everybody says that, you've been a pioneer and that, you did these things early, Dipali. And, you're lucky that you kind of got to learn when everybody else was learning too.
What I also find interesting is the fact that the kind of things you've mentioned right now, right? The bringing in of technology and many people have said, okay, marketing was always an analog way of doing things, primarily because what you are creating was, or your creativity was at the center of it. I think it still is. But everything else was kind of helping amplify that. But now I think that I think the technology part has become as central to marketing as creativity itself.
Yes.
Primarily because that's how we can scale it out, and that's how you get better results.
Yes. There is one more aspect, Varun, though. It's not just about getting better results. I think technology has added dialogue to a brand and a marketing. The earlier analog way, if I were to use the term that you used, was a one-way street. It was a brand manager, a CEO's, a founder's point of view that you kept on communicating, to the end consumer, and they perceived the brand or your advertising or your product to be like that. What technology has done in recent times after digital has come in is that it's a two-way street. Today, I have social listening. And even apart from social listening, the very quick customer journey that we have and the rejections that you have and the options that customers have and the choices that they're making. And the fact that I can do A/B testing on, when I give this message, what happens, and when I use these keywords, what happens. And the fact that there is a search engine where, I kind of choose what people are searching. There is an interactivity that has come in which did not exist before. And interestingly, I say this, that the old world concept also was that a brand really exists in a consumer's mind. It doesn't really exist on the document that I have inside my organization, right? But that is so much more true today. But today I have a peep into that mind because of the interactivity. Earlier, I would go and do market research and, you'd still get to know half the things and half the things were unsaid. But today, live, I know what's happening to my brand. And equally, the consumer is co-creator of my brand. They can make or break the brand too, Varun. And I mean, that's the powerful change that has happened in the space of brand management.
Even in terms of change, I think what we've been going through over the last few months, primarily with the push towards digital transformation, right? Primarily because of COVID and everybody being, moving to work from home, etc. You've had experience across multiple sectors, right? I mean, the finance sector, tech sector right now, travel, etc. How do you see each of these spaces kind of evolving, especially not just from a marketing perspective, but I think from an overall perspective? What do you see the points of evolution for each of them?
I think, Varun, every business today, first of all, is reevaluating themselves and saying, how do I reinvent my business model to ensure that I don't have future shocks? The first realization that all boards, CEOs, CIOs whom we talk to very frequently are saying that we weren't ready for this. Nobody was ready for this. So I think one realization that the world has had is the world of business, that we need to be ready for future shocks. So they are re-looking at their business models itself. Now to the three specific areas that you asked, financial services is considered essential service. Thankfully, the task of digitization had actually started earlier, especially in India, when demonetization happened. Actually, there was also a push that happened towards digitization. And therefore, as consumers today, we aren't that bad off. Everything seems to work. Okay, we've quickly, all of us have had options to move to wallets. There were so many wallets. Banks were providing the wallet. The UPI system works. The digital, bank transfers work. We're actually able to manage without checkbooks. And even the smallest unit of what I call a bhajiwala or a ironing person or a maid,
they all have Google Pay or Paytm or something like that. They all have something.
It's working. Yeah. So that's the wonderful part of what is happening in financial services. But I think the financial services are now looking at themselves and saying, okay, what a bank of future is really going to look like. Okay. And what is the correlation that I have with my ecosystem and the wallets? Because, a bank can't exist alone, for example. It has to have an ecosystem around it which works on digitization, right? So that's the situation that the banks are in a much advanced life stage, I would say. Let's look at travel, though. Travel is all about physical experiences, right? And those cannot be considered or made virtual overnight. There will still be room for maybe 10 or 15% of those experiences to go virtual, but they may not actually be exactly travel experiences. It's like the good old, concept that we used to have, that popcorn competed with ice cream, which, competed with a bag of chips. Right. And people could actually choose across categories to stave off their hunger. Right. So today I want to, what did travel do? It gave me an opportunity to come together with family or friends. And the second thing, it was stress relief. Right. And that I could take off and be somewhere else. Now, there, I think travel just might have to rethink as to who they're competing with. For example, in my son's case, again, let me take that example. He's a Gen Z, right? A gaming is actually competing with travel in his case. He will be willing to give up travel, but do fantastic things in the gaming space. Similarly, somebody like me will make a choice of not doing international travel, but doing domestic travel, And a lot of different things are an opportunities where travel companies really need to relook at themselves. The other part of travel is airlines. Their business is going to get impacted in the short term. And when I use the word short term, I mean next 18 months. I don't mean next 6 months, We might go back to normal and travel as we used to earlier, but I don't think that's going to happen, till 2022. This is my personal estimate. Okay. I completely own that kind of point of view, right? On the tech side, once again, there will be businesses who will do extremely well because, they have products and software and, platforms which the companies would want now. And there would be some technology stacks and some technology companies which will become outdated. But I think that's part and parcel of a tech cycle. Technology cycles have always been like that. I mean, you look at company that I work for, IBM, for example, we are present across the technology stack, but we are constantly reinventing ourselves. We are already talking about technologies of the future, such as edge computing and blockchain. And we've been the pioneers in the space of AI with Watson. So these are the three. And then, of course, there are the FMCG companies, and I have worked for FMCG companies too, right? Their mainstay is what I call in the Indian terms, they are the roti, kapda, makan part of the three necessities, right? So they are the roti,
For sure.
So there, I think they will continue to stay the way they are. I think they will probably reinvent their supply chain. They will definitely look at that to ensure that we have much better presence, that we do not get impacted by shocks. But that's, I think, more in the background. The end consumer will continue to consume the products the way they're consuming today. So that's, I think, the lay of the land that I wanted to share with you for 4 different industries. And I think each one, similarly, there are more industries. For example, e-commerce, suddenly will get a boost and is accelerated. What is happening over there. Durables is going to be very different. You and I were discussing how suddenly I'm very interested in a Roomba. Suddenly I'm very interested in a new remodeled kitchen. Suddenly I'm very interested in what kind of a vacuum cleaner for my home to buy. Things that just didn't bother, well-off housewife earlier. But these are things that will become important. So the cycles for each industry and category will be different. And I will be a poor marketer or a poor CEO if I were to say that, change is going to happen everywhere at the same level and with the same pace. It's going to be different for every industry and category.
I was listening to an interview of Brian Chesky, right? Because Airbnb was going to go in for an IPO, just like they were preparing to go for an IPO when COVID hit, and obviously could not have had like worse luck in that sense. But he was talking about the fact that they've actually re-looked at the business and said that, okay, we were trying to do a lot of things. Might be a time to refocus and focus on a few things. And I like the fact that you mentioned domestic travel, because one of the things he said was that for travel now, it'll have to be a lot more about the radius to which a person can actually travel. Might not be, continents away. Might just be, what's a couple of 100 kilometers away where you can drive to, etc.
Absolutely.
And he said that's why we're really going to focus and really scale, because that's where we see immediate growth coming, at least in the short term.
Yes, I agree with him. He's an intelligent man.
Yeah, but I was just thinking about this, just the fact that there's a lot of shake-up happening, right, in terms of just how even every person as a leader has had to rethink about not just how their business functions, but also about how their people function. And you've been in a leadership role over a period of time. How have you seen yourself evolve as a leader? Not just in the last couple of months, but let's say over time.
Varun, I think I've become more and more humble, I would say, as a leader. You realize as time passes that not everything can be in your control and that things will go wrong. But the size of your reaction, the way you respond to those things that are going wrong, changes over a period of time. I definitely panic far less because I have seen so many things go wrong that I know that things will also get better. So you develop that equanimity. So that's, I think, one change that has happened to me as a leader, and it plays back at me because, the team will come back and tell you that sometimes, when you're in the midst of executing something and things are going wrong and you take a decision and, team will come and say, Dipali, I wish, I often get this. I wish that I was as peaceful at that point of time as you were, kind of a thing. And let me just give you one example. We were recently doing a webinar. And we had a situation with we had only one speaker that day. And that speaker had a situation at home and was not able to come to the webinar at a 3 hours notice. And we did not have a backup speaker, right? So my team called me at 8 a.m. in the morning. Then they called me at 9 a.m. in the morning, to get instructions from me or to discuss options with me and, make me, they wanted me to take the decision, which I did till about 9:30, right? Then they called me up at 10 again for the 11 o'clock webinar. And at 10, I told them this. I said, let me name those guys. I said, Bala and Rashi, you both are extremely capable. You're going to now take the decision and not give me a call because you're into the webinar just now, whatever decision you want to take. And I'm going to back you up because that would be the right decision that you would take given the circumstances that you had, So I see myself maturing as a leader too, and that's why I want to share this example. So that's one thing, which is about how do you manage things going wrong. Second is, within this is that you accept failure. You learn from failures. You say to yourself that failures are a stepping stone to success as long as you don't make the same mistake, again. So that's the other thing about things going wrong and failure that happens to you. One. I think the second thing that has happened to me, Varun, over a period of time is that I'm very proud of the leaders I have produced. People who were part of my team. They've gone on to become, head of brand somewhere else. They've gone on to, lead e-commerce, businesses somewhere else. They've gone on to lead and become head of digital somewhere else. They've gone and become loyalty heads somewhere else. And I'm so proud of the fact that, for me, it is it's a very motherly feeling, I must admit, that, I nurtured their brains. I saw their strengths. I saw their skills. And all of them, of course, come and discuss their career options with me. I'm their, go-to mentor, even though they're not part of my team any longer. And so that's the second thing that happens to you over a period of time as you mature, as a leader. I think the third thing I do want to refer to the whole COVID situation, because I think it has accelerated the maturity quite a bit, I think we were perfectionists somewhere. In terms of the way we put out advertising to our consumers, the way we put out presentations internally, you wanted it to be perfect to the maximum level possible, and you did not leave a room for a mistake. But COVID has made you realize that you can't do it perfect. So, for example, we did an ad which was produced in-house on National Technology Day. Our 7 leaders participated. Each one of us was supposed to have a printed piece of paper on us. Somebody's printer did not work. We in the end had, like nicely handwritten stuff with that leader, going on. It's an ad on our YouTube, right? The second thing, I had a presentation on Friday where 17 of my team members were presenting. Okay. It was an AP wide presentation, right? And even before we went into the presentation, I told them, I said, listen, Wi-Fi is going to fail. We are going to have issues. Bangalore is having power cuts. Let's be prepared for this, right? So you no longer want perfection. You're saying that let's just get on with it. A lot of my managers, my bosses, bigger leaders, I'm so patient today when somebody's child walks in. You don't think somebody is unprofessional, just because you have these disturbances. There is a completely new normal in terms of acceptance of, work and home integration. So that's a beautiful thing. I myself have an example, Varun. I could not make one of my meetings. It was an AP level meeting. And I actually had to tell my operations controller that day, say, listen, I'm in the veggie queue for the last 2 hours. I can't give up my turn. Okay. So I'm going to be late for the meeting by about 20 minutes, and it was completely acceptable for her to get it, So, Varun, that's the thing. So one maturity has happened over years, and suddenly COVID has made you mature about so many things within, days and weeks.
I think we also see each other in true reality now, right? I mean, there was always a way that you brought yourself into an office space, which was obviously basis what you thought was the right way to showcase yourself, etc., and all that stuff. But I think now we've all seen each other's houses. We've seen, kids kind of walking into frame. We've seen I think I have one call every afternoon during weekdays where I'm like, guys, I'm sorry, you'll hear some water noises because I'm rinsing dishes while I'm talking to you all. So I think we've learned to be okay with those things. I love the fact that you mentioned the perfectionist part, right? Because I've always felt that where the technology companies have really innovated, it was the fact that they looked at every process as an iterative process. Like and they would look at, okay, let's put something out, let's see how it works, let's see what works, what doesn't work, and let's be iterative with it. I think that's now truly a part of marketing in the largest sense, where we've learned that actually is effective.
I think 2 more things I want to mention here though, Varun, while you're talking about it. I think, you said something that we brought ourselves to work the way we thought was right. And, now you're seeing the reality. And I call this authenticity. There, though,
True.
I think I probably scored as a leader because a lot of my team and people have realized that I'm pretty much the same how I used to be earlier at work and now how I am at home. But
Yeah.
I do know what you mean, and I will also say this, that I think a lot of the leaders and people that I admire, are people who are pretty much the same throughout. So there's not much change in them just because we are seeing a real authentic self. Yes, we may be able to have a window into their homes. We know where they live now, and we know what books are on their shelves, and those kind of things. But I think the authenticity bit is still the same with leaders who always believe that you need to be authentic at all time, because you can't wear a mask when you come to work or go for office meetings. That's
I agree.
not real, and that's not done.
I also saying that because I think there's been this whole performance-driven culture, right, in marketing, which is kind of kind of grown over time. The fact that there's so many different, and not just from an individual standpoint, but in terms of what all you need to deliver. Yeah. I think for a lot of people, it's also become a time saying, 1 second, I don't necessarily have to drive myself to that. There is a smarter way of doing it, and bring some balance to it.
Yes and no, Varun. I think people in marketing have always striven for doing things better and smarter. And I think they will continue to do that. And I think that's a right way to do it. I think where companies need to matter and bother and think about is that there needs to be room for failure, but small failures. So
100%.
small failure, you can't fail spectacularly, as I say it, so people misinterpret this when I say there needs to be room for failure. So therefore I'm explaining this. So for example, there are teams where I have led the teams and I said, okay, 5% of our marketing budget is for experimentation, right? And it's my pact with the CHRO and my CEO that I will never come and tell you who led which experiment, which failed. I said it's a team failure that happens, right? But the point is that my pact with my team is that you will measure everything. When you decide to do an experiment, you will come to the table to say, I'm running this experiment, but I will know when it fails and when it succeeds, right? I will not hold it against you that it failed, but believe me, when it succeeds, you will succeed spectacularly. And that's when I will make you a hero, in the whole marketing team. So that kind of room for failure and that kind of room for culture needs to be built in. But this spirit of innovation, that you're allowed to fail and you're running an experiment, actually fosters the spirit of working smarter, among the people. So working smarter, I think, is always something that people need to think of. I am not going to let go of that one.
Would you say that these are the pieces? I mean, if I was someone who, let's say I'm in college right now, just finishing up, right, and wondering, okay, is everything that I've kind of learned, my job in marketing, what it might involve, is that going to entirely change, or do I need to get some other skill sets in? And my response has always been not necessarily, the basics you learn will stay. But what would you say to someone who's kind of just like was supposed to set off into a career right now, and they're seeing so much disruption around
Okay,
them?
so I agree with you, and let's define it. So there are skills that you learn in college and that you hone over a period of time. So for example, the way you approach problems, right? The problem solving skills, how you lay out options, how your risk taking ability is, how you mitigate risk. Those are the skills that will never change, and you will hone them over a period of time and will always be required. Not that you can't learn them, you will, right? And the second set of skills which always come to your foray, your verbal communication skill, your written communication skill, your business communication skill, how you write emails, how you communicate the ideas that you have, how much courage you have at work to speak for the idea that you truly believe in. How much courage do you have at work to speak for the consumer? How much courage do you have at work to speak for the right thing to do for the business? I think those are skills that you learn in your early years and in environments which, foster that kind of a spirit. And then in the third leg in your career, you will then become leaders and you will foster such cultures. So these are basic skills which has got nothing to do with whether you're in marketing or in finance or in operations or in, some other function altogether. Yeah. So that's one learning, right? The second is that you need to be a lifelong learner. Now imagine that I've had to learn, right? I've had to learn what SEO was. I've had to learn what social media listening is. I've had to learn how to manage my brand and my company's brand on LinkedIn. Some years ago, I didn't know what Instagram was, and I've had to learn that. So those are then your functional knowledge skills that you need to learn, just like doctors learn about new scientific discovery. Similarly, marketers need to learn some new channels, methodologies, correlations, algorithms, and then apply the brand concepts and the brand identity and the brand prism and channel of communication, then apply those with this newfound learning to make it better. So there are two parts to it. There is things that you learn early on that you must continue to learn, and those are not functional skills, but there is stuff related to your domain knowledge that you will need to continue to build. And the third thing, I think, therefore, what I'm emphasizing is that do you have a learning attitude? Do you have a learning bone? Are you a lifelong learner? To me, that's the most important quality that a person ought to have when they're passing out of college. They should not think that learning is over and, now I'm here to take decisions.
So true, because I think every day if you don't learn something, because you especially in the world we work in right now, you might wake up today and say that okay, everything is kind of changed, and you have to then adapt yourself towards that. Like you said, the basics won't change, but the way you end up doing it might entirely change. While you've spoken about all the stuff that you've had to learn, or what have you had to unlearn? If you had to kind of say, okay, over time, what are the things that you actually said, okay, I need to unlearn these things, especially with the way the market's evolving?
I think one thing I spoke about, the perfectionist attitude. I think that. Second thing that you unlearn over a period of time is that you can't be expert at every aspect. So there was a point of time in my life when I was the head of marketing, head of customer service, and head of e-commerce, right? Customer service was a domain that I did not know earlier on. So I did not always have ready solutions to give to my team. So as a leader, for example, today when it comes to brand and digital and e-commerce, I might have ready solutions to give to my team when they come to me with a problem. But in customer service, I did not. And that's when you learn, or I had to unlearn that I will not always have a solution for my team. And then you seek help, then you dialogue with them, then you coach them into finding a solution for themselves. And that's when you also learn that you better hire really, really smart people in your team. So Varun, I have this principle that I kind of heard about from somebody else, but I've adopted it, which is that my direct reports, need to be such people that I don't mind actually working for them, that I consider them as leaders, or that I would love to work under them. So that's now my yardstick for who I have in my team. So today, for example, even at IBM, I have about 8 or 9 reportees, and they're all such brilliant leaders and smart people and experts in their domain that I wouldn't mind working for them.
And that's the way to be as well, right? Because I think if you don't build up people who can do what you do, then how are you going to then progress to doing more things? I have this theory about a plate, right? As professionals, we have this one plate which you can fill up with a lot of things. But unless we can transfer some of that to someone else and trust that they will do that really well and can take over your entire plate while you're adding more things to yours, I mean, you're never going to grow, and neither will they.
Absolutely, Varun. And that's such an important lesson. And I think that is the one pearl of wisdom today that you and I have discussed, which youngsters should note, and I think which middle-level managers should also learn. You must have your plate full, but then you should also have people to whom you can give the portions away when time for your growth comes.
Have you, but do you feel that some of these pieces will evolve slightly differently in terms of how we work together with direct reportees, with our teams, etc. Because of the amount of remote working that like at least I foresee that being a large part of life going ahead. Do you foresee that? And I know that you had mentioned not in this conversation but earlier that IBM had actually moved to a system of having a lot more remote working. So have you seen that change the way teams function?
There is a slight change that will happen, I think, in the larger ecosystem, because some organizations were not used to remote working. IBM has always been, sensitive to the fact that remote working is possible, and we were very well enabled. I'd mentioned to you that our office in BKC is actually a great example of how, people can collaborate and come to work. It's completely hot desk. There is no desk, assigned to anybody, with lots of meeting rooms, lots of places to collaborate, different kinds of places, for whiteboarding and conferencing, and so on and so forth. So I think, yes, some part of it will change in terms of how we work. But the second bit, I think, is also as individuals, we will need to change. So, for example, Varun, when you used to come to work, you drew off other people's energy. There was a certain atmosphere at work where you worked every day. Even if you were just doing your own thing, there was a buzz and an energy around you, because there were, 50 people sitting in that bay or in that room. Now you don't have that advantage. The one thing that you need to do to yourself is you need to bring your own energy to work every day, because I'm sitting on my dining table and putting the laptop on and, working on it. So I need to bring that energy to the table every day. I need to motivate myself, because people are not going to be around me. Even post-COVID, let's say things become normal, there will be a lot more working from home that will continue to happen. And that's when this energy will start counting. People will still need to collaborate, and I think face-to-face is not going away, because the brainstorming, the collaboration, the alignments that you need to do, the design thinking workshop that you need to kind of organize and participate in, those will still, I think, go back to face-to-face, because you can't, in remote working, for example, I can't do an 8-hour workshop today. It's not possible. Okay. But an 8-hour workshop face-to-face, immensely possible. So those differences will continue to remain.
I think that the energy part, I think, is so valid, right? Because that's what, and that's the interesting conversation which I keep reading about, this whole discussion of the modern workplace, and I see both sides. One side saying, okay, you have more flexibility, you can, you don't necessarily have to clock in and clock out. But the conversation on energy, especially for someone who's let's say just come in and start a career, I saw this interesting trend which said that young people, both for security but also for the fact that they want to work in spaces that have more energy around them, will gravitate towards organizations that are larger but yet will include the ability to work from one place with a lot of people, rather than let's say a startup which says, okay, let's all work remotely, and we'll take it as it goes.
Because I think young people seek a lot more energy from others. They want to learn from others, and they do get guided by others, which is not necessarily their own manager, because the remote working limits your interaction to people who directly are involved in a meeting. Whereas at work, the famous water cooler breaks, as they're called, you feed off of a lot of people who may not be directly involved in your project. So I kind of buy that completely, what you're saying. And I think the younger people today, I've noticed, also want fun at work. It can't be all serious and boring. So that fun at work element also comes a lot with interaction, that you can have with other people. So I buy that. They would want to work not completely remote all the time.
I was talking about this also in context of how agencies function right now. We've had conversations about how does an agency need to function right now. What are the expectations that we need to fulfill? I mean, I guess some of those things have also kind of changed, especially I would say last couple of years, but I think the last 3-4 months has also added on a lot over there.
Yeah.
What would you say your expectation from agencies would be?
It's very interesting that you ask me this, because both of my large agencies have already gotten me into 1-hour sessions to talk to their teams exactly about this, right? I think one thing that agencies need to do is they need to develop agility and the ability to pivot very quickly. I think one thing that got tested during this is that which were my marketing partners who were able to pivot very quickly and understand my brand and come back to me with solutions which were practical during the COVID period. So people who had invested into understanding the brand, the necessity, the requirement of what a marketing team ought to do, who were intelligent enough to realize that some things we will have to give up, that mattered, the sheer IQ. The second part of the agencies was the EQ part of the agencies, right? The short term versus the long term. I think in the short term, if they had to give up certain tactics, mechanics, where they weren't, where they were going to make money, they would have to give it up. And in terms of experimentation, they may be doing things for us where the profitability levels are lower, but they are helping me build my business. I think that a marketer or a CEO or a founder will really value in agencies. So that is the EQ part of how agencies are servicing their clients, which would matter. Because ultimately these are all human chemistry based, relationships. People will remember, who supported me, who gave me a great idea, who was selfless enough, to bring the idea to me, even they did not make any money on this. I think most CMOs with character remember that about their agencies and reward the agencies eventually. So the IQ and the EQ both will matter.
I also feel that at some point, everyone's kind of concerned, and I can sense this whenever I speak to people across agencies, that there is a growing sense of, or not, I wouldn't say concern, they are a little worried also that brands are seeing a lot more value and in-housing a lot more now, so that there's a level of control basis how the companies function.
Yeah.
Say something like this happens again. What's your take on in-housing? Because I know that's a conversation that's been going on for a while now.
I think this in-housing conversation is not due to COVID. I think the in-housing conversation has been going on for a couple of years. And I also think that it got precipitated by the e-commerce companies. So, for example, large e-commerce companies such as, let's say, Amazon or Airbnb or, even Make My Trip, where financial services was completely dependent on agencies to do their SEO, SEM. These companies said that this is such a large part of my business and so integral to my business that I have to take it in-house. So they will do that. Then, of course, there are experiments, so a friend who works for Ixigo, they do their video production in-house because they may not have the budgets or because they may be interested in doing it, right? But the video production in-house is not the norm, Varun. I think some companies were forced to do it because the agencies were in transition. The large agencies charged, really millions to make, those 30-second ads. And they weren't very quick in pivoting to doing much cheaper, multiple video formats, many 20-seconders and many 30-seconders and the long format video at cheaper prices. So a lot of people went either to boutique agencies who were willing to do it, so video format is just one example to tell you that, what is this whole in-house versus outside. I, for example, work directly with the producer because the producer gave me rates and reorganized his business to ensure that I was able to do 250 videos in 1 year. I could not have paid the large agency fees for 250 videos. So I think this in-house versus out-housing debate is about agencies to think that if a client, and I'm true to IBM, I'm true to the brand that I'm working for, right? And I have a profit P&L kind of, thing to manage when I'm managing an e-commerce business, right? So lowering cost for me is an extremely important pillar. And if my agency is not going to do it and I am going to find similar value by doing it in-house, then I will go ahead and do it for a while. And I think that's when the agencies need to reconsider their business model, the way they hire, the way they are structured. It's almost like their own production shop needs to be reorganized for them to think that, how can I deliver it at a cost which is beneficial to the client? Because a client may be willing to pay 10-15% extra for not taking everything in-house, but I'm definitely not willing to pay 10 times more. So I think that's the consideration.
It's interesting that you spoke about video, right? Because that's pretty much been my focus area, I think, for my entire career. And when anybody asks me, what do I see the future as? And I actually have stopped using the word video. I actually now say we're in the asset creation business. And the more volume of assets we can create for a better pricing model is really the way. Because television commercials for me are the smallest part of what the future of content production or asset production in this space is, right? It's like, it's one of those things you do there to just kind of maybe put it out for people to see or for some awards and stuff like that. But I think the main work is really how many assets can you create for how much less per unit cost, and that's really the future.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that in. And when I use the video, I think I did use it loosely, and I think you absolutely right in pointing out that it's asset creation. And the last mega website that I did for the previous organization that I worked for, and that's exactly what happened. We bought 5-second videos, because the whole website was about shorter videos and this background impact and things like those, right? We actually bought footage which was, not our own. We just bought 5-second video, which kind of made sense for us to use. And it was so cheap to do it. And I am so glad that the production house that I worked with actually suggested that, because, my design agency said we need videos, but it was the production house who said that let's not shoot it, Dipali, because you don't really need it. You just need, like a people shot, or you need a ball moving shot, or, you need, a chess piece moving shot, and we can just get it from somewhere else and it'll be so, cheap for you. So you're bang on in saying that it's about asset creation. And my recent fanaticism about this asset creation, for example, the example that I love to give is that I think it's about experience creation. The edtech, the educational brands need to think, how can they do an absorbing gaming experience to get my kid to be on a educational website, And I think that's where people need to think. So it's no longer just a video. And thank you for correcting me there. I so totally believe in what you're saying.
And I've had to change my mind about this, right? Because in the sense that because I studied audiovisual production and then ended up working, directing and producing all that stuff. But and nowadays when I talk about it, everyone's like, why aren't you talking about the main commercial? I'm like, no, I'm talking about, okay, how do we make sure we can do this part at scale? Let's look at what. I mean, things were considered the periphery or the smaller pieces around it are actually the most important part. Like, how can you almost make each brand build out their own form of Shutterstock, right? You have so many assets you created over years. Repurposing has become a conversation now with a lot of clients saying, that we have shot so many things over the years. Can't we reuse some of those and stuff like that? So I think it's going to be a very interesting road ahead, especially for I like to call them purists, the ones who say we have to shoot a commercial the way a commercial was shot, and that there is, and I'm not taking away from that at all. But I still believe that's now a part of the entire chain and no longer the highlight of
Absolutely. And now imagine a travel company, right? You are serving a video asset to a consumer who is looking for a holiday near the home, right? Now, there are 5 pieces to that video, which is that recognizing that I stay in Bombay, then recognizing, 100 kilometers radius of Bombay and therefore offering me 4 options. And then, finding out through my previous journey whether I'm interested in a beach or a hilly or whatever area, because I've done certain choices in my journey online. So therefore serving me options of those, right? And then 4th is the price. Now just think, this can be a 4-part video and I could have pre-shot all these 4 parts, and with the permutation combination and an AI engine working at the back of it, you will be able to serve video to every single consumer, which is different. It is that famous NP, C combination that you get. So you've shot maybe just 8 sections, 2 each. But imagine the permutation combination videos that you'll be able to serve. Now, that's where I think the creative directors need to think differently, So agencies such as yours, you no longer have a value for a creative director who can think one, famous commercial which will run on for 30 seconds and, do it. I need smart people on my performance side, especially, who will say that Dipali will create this video digital assets for you, where you'll be able to serve videos to each one of your consumer through AI. Now, this requires different kind of creative thinking, Varun. So you're bang on in saying that we need to just think differently when it comes to, serving video and video production.
If you had to future gaze, and I know we've discussed a lot of, points through this conversation, but if you had to kind of future gaze and say, okay, these are definitely, and I know you keep getting asked this, and I've asked you this question myself a couple of times. What would you say are the trends kind of going ahead if you had to pick a few?
I think the trends that one needs to look for is that I think more and more the authenticity that you have in brand, in marketing, in channels, and the communication, all that will matter. So one is the authenticity. People are willing to forgive. People, I think, thanks to COVID, will always be willing to forgive, and therefore the perfection may not matter. So the authenticity will matter. Second is how quickly as a business, as marketing, as people, are you able to pivot, and therefore the agility will matter. And I know you've heard me say this before, right? And third is that you must build abilities for future. You must think, and all the time. So I will be able to future gaze, let's say, for the next 12 to 18 months. But this is a question that I think each individual, as the employees for themselves, to ensure that they have jobs for tomorrow. And I think as businesses, we need to keep on adding skills and ability. So this whole learnability thing that we discussed earlier, right? So authenticity, agility, and ability. I think these are the 3 mantras that I have developed during this COVID period and say these are the 3 things that are going to matter.
Towards the end of every episode of Advertising is Dead, I do a segment I like to call Humans of Advertising.
Sure.
Slightly off the cuff questions, not necessarily, this is not, and I've said this too many times, not me trying to be Karan Johar in rapid fire.
Sure.
I've realized this segment is never rapid and has always got into different directions.
Sure.
What are you a consumer of that people who would know you generally would be surprised to know you're actually, like you enjoy? It can be something that you watch, could be something that you do. What is that one piece that you say would surprise you?
I read Mills and Boon novels still. I know it's a very teenage thing to do, but I still do.
It was so easy, right? It's also about you need to find something easy breezy to get through sometimes.
Yeah.
What can you put together in an instant?
A salad.
What's your go-to salad then, if I have to ask you a follow-up on that?
Okay, sorry. What I can put together in an instant and what is my go-to salad is get a lot of these exotic veggies and they actually saute, vegetable saute kind of a thing. Completely easy peasy, gets done in about 5 minutes. But yes, I need help for somebody else to chop it for me. Otherwise, it doesn't get done easy peasy. But I think I can do a lot of salads. I can do guacamole on the go. I can do saute vegetables on the go. I make dressings from scratch. But yeah, salads is something I can do. The other very elaborate form of cooking, biryanis and stuff like that is not me.
If you had to recommend something you've read or listened to in the recent past, what would those be? Any recommendations of books, podcasts, anything?
So there are 2-3 books that I really recommend to people to always read. One is How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think it's a book which is 30 or 40 years old, but people should continue to read it. The second book that I recommend for marketers is Blue Ocean Strategy, because it brings home the fact that, the world is going to be different for tomorrow. And the third piece is an HBR article which was written in the 70s, Marketing Myopia. I think it works well with the Blue Ocean Strategy. So one is on the EQ side and the second is on the IQ side for marketers. These are my 3 go-to stuff that I might want to even reread sometimes.
And to close it off, why do you think advertising will not die?
Advertising will not die because people will need to be told about new products all the time. So advertising in the way it exists may completely change for tomorrow. Advertising as it existed 30 years ago has completely changed, to today. But people will need economy. People will need to either barter things. People will need to buy things. And as long as the commercial aspect of living continues, people will need to communicate. So even if we went back to how the gorillas lived, or even if we went back to how Adivasis lived, right? People still needed to tell others about the things that they own and possess, right? Religion requires advertising, if I may use the term, right? It requires communication of what it is all about. So these age-old concepts are not going to die ever.
Perfect. Thank you so much for doing this. I think it's always a pleasure chatting with you, but I think it's this conversation specifically has so much insight for anyone kind of get out of. And thanks for coming on Advertising is Dead.
Thank you for having me, Varun. I really enjoyed the conversation today, and you made me go back and think and rethink, and nostalgia and so much more happened for me also. So I truly enjoyed it. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that show. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. It really has been a great week this week. We've had 2 of our first international cricketers show up, people who have played for their respective sides. We had W.V. Raman come on Edges and Sledges, the cricket podcast. If you haven't heard that, you should be listening to that if you enjoy cricket. It's really one of the best out there. And you should also definitely check out Monty Pandithar, who showed up on Cyrus Says. That was another really interesting conversation that occurred. If you haven't been listening to a few of our shorter shows, please do that as well. Ashish Vidyarthi has been doing a great job for us. We got 30 episodes now on Begin the Journey. I think you really enjoyed that show. If you haven't listened to it, it helps you with understanding what's going on in this tough time and how to deal with it from a mental health perspective. We've also had some really fun stuff come up on the Smile India show. Shifa's been doing a lot of really good stories over there, things that just make you happy, so definitely do check that out. And on the more serious side, make sure that you're checking out our regular shows like the Pragati podcast, All Things Policy. They're definitely going to keep you up to date on what's going on in this COVID world. And thanks for listening, and we hope to catch you again next week.
Namaskar, this is Ashish Vidyarthi. Yes, my friend, these are challenging times, but in these challenging times, we can create something extraordinary. Do take time to listen to my podcast, Begin the Journey. Available on the IVM Podcast, website, app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember, we have a great opportunity called life. Cheers.
How many times have you motivated yourself to improve your sleep, or lose weight, or be more productive? How many times have you failed? Hi, my name is Ashton Doctor. Tune into my show, The Habit Coach Podcast, where we focus on creating small, tiny habits to improve your life instead of those big, impossible tasks. So make listening to me a habit every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com or on your favorite podcasting app.